So remember all those big wins between Putin and Trump in Alaska last week? Yeah, Russia's walking them all back. Like one by one, just going down the checklist explaining how, nope, that is not agreed upon, or at the very least, there's still a long ways to go before we even consider that. So much so that one Russian commentator wrote, quote, "It can be seen as simply a stalling tactic in which our leaders have become quite skilled," end quote, which I don't know who possibly could have seen that scenario playing out. Now, what we're going to do today is run through a couple clips, the positive side of things, and I should note that all of these, if they played out as announced, would have been a great step in the right direction towards a just and lasting peace in this war. The problem is, it doesn't look like that's actually where we are. So we've got the positive side of things coming from senior U.S. officials, and then we've essentially got a one-for-one response from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Let's start out here with the possibility of a meeting, a bilateral meeting or a trilateral meeting. Here's Secretary of State Rubio talking about that.
By the way, President Trump is the only leader in the world, acknowledged by all the Europeans, the only leader in the world that can talk to both of them and bring them both to a meeting is Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States. He's the only one. And the fact that he's willing to do it is something that every American, including Democrats, should be happy that we have a peace president. We should be proud that we have a president that's made peace a priority in his administration.
Now, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, responded to that by saying, quote, "Any meeting would have to be prepared gradually, starting with the expert level and thereafter going through all of the required steps." Interpretation there is, yeah. And he even said this. He said, we're not opposed to bilateral or trilateral meetings. Anything is on the table. But guys, first, we got to start with, let's get the negotiating teams together and get the lower level diplomats. And we got to sort out the timing for that and the location and everything. And once all of that is put together and then they have some meetings and we start to work this forward, then we can consider maybe getting Zelensky and Putin to sit down and talk. It's just stalling. I mean, again, as a comparison, think of how little timing and notice was needed for Putin to drop everything and travel to Alaska and meet with President Trump. Think of how even less notice that was needed for the European leaders and President Zelensky to go to Washington, D.C. and meet with President Trump. In that meeting, and contrast this sense of urgency between the two, President Trump calling Putin from the Oval Office during the course of those meetings to try to figure out the next step, and now we have Russia saying, yeah. But we got to do a bunch of things first. We'll get to it. Don't worry. We'll get to it. Just not now. By itself, I can see how you might be able to poke holes in that. But as we move through this, you're just going to see one stalling tactic after another. It continues with another one of these major items that I praised and said, if this is actually genuine, it's a major accomplishment. This is Steve Witkoff talking about Russia agreeing to NATO Article 5-like security guarantees for Ukraine. Let's give that a quick listen.
You mentioned the Article 5 guarantee of NATO, an attack on one and it's an attack on all. Russia would allow that to happen, that any further incursions into Ukraine, Russia would understand would be seen as an attack on all NATO members?
No, Jake, that's not what I said. What I said is that we got to an agreement that the United States and other European nations could effectively offer Article 5-like language to cover a security guarantee. So Putin has said that a red flag is NATO admission.
Right.
And so what we were discussing was assuming that that held, assuming that the Ukrainians could agree to that and could live with that, and everything is going to be about what the Ukrainians can live with. But assuming they could, we were able to win the following concession, that the United States could offer Article 5-like protection, which is one of the real reasons why Ukraine wants to be in NATO. We sort of were able to bypass that and get an agreement that the United States could offer Article 5 protection, which was the first time we had ever heard the Russians agree to that.
So real quick, I have to say now we probably need to question all of those wins down the line. It looks like the United States came away thinking we had all of these wins, and Russia may have had a very different perspective of how things played out. So to the idea of security guarantees, which I will repeat, if there is some sort of hard and fast, clearly defined and believed security guarantee put in place by the United States and or a variety of Ukraine's European allies, That would be significant. It's arguably President Zelensky's biggest ask at this point. Russia had a response to this, which shouldn't be surprising because the idea that they just agreed to some sort of NATO Article 5 type protection for Ukraine was a little bit shocking when it came out. Again, Foreign Minister Lavrov said Russia agrees that security guarantees for Ukraine should be provided on an equal basis with the participation of countries such as China, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Russia. Yes, and we've covered this twice in 2 weeks now. Russia has multiple times said that they will be one of the guarantors of Ukrainian security. You are hearing that correct. Russia wants oversight. They are going to police themselves along portions of the front. Lavrov added, quote, seriously discussing security guarantees without Russia is a road to nowhere. As in, at the very least, Russia needs to approve of the security guarantees that are put in place for Ukraine to protect Ukraine from Russia. Take geopolitics out of this. This is one of those things where you can just narrow it down to a common sense type deal. Where would that work anywhere? Ukraine is not worried about Poland. They're not worried about Latvia. They're not really worried about Belarus, all things considered. They're worried about Russia. In what world would we want the final agreement to make sure that Russia is okay with the protection that is being put in place to protect against them? That's pretty wild when you step back and think about it. Now, we got a couple more here going to the root of the conflict. You'll notice that in recent days, we've heard Russia continually come back to that and say, yeah, peace deal is important. We just have to make sure we address the root causes of the war. And President Trump spoke to that on Fox just yesterday about what he believes, as of now, are the root causes of the war: NATO and Crimea. Let's give that a listen.
And so there's great hostility, and maybe rightfully so. But one thing was NATO. They went in. They said, "We want you. We want to get Crimea back." This was at the beginning. Now, Putin, in all fairness to him, he made a good deal. He got it from Obama. But they said, "We want it back," and that was not exactly well received because it was like 12 years before. That's where Russia has its submarine base, and that's been there long before Putin. They've been there for a long time, but long before Putin. And the other thing they said is, "We want to be a member of NATO." Well, both of those things are impossible because, again, long before Putin, it was a no-no by Russia or the Soviet Union or anything you want to call it. Sort of a similar thing as it gets larger, but very similar. But it was always a no-no. You could not. Russia said, we don't want the so-called opponent or the enemy, let's use that term, we don't want them on our border. And they were right. They were okay. And yet they went in and they asked, with the United States, they said, put us into NATO. And everybody knew you just can't do that. They would never have agreed to it. This is before Putin. This is long before Putin. It was just a no-no. It was something that was never going to happen. So they asked for it, and they shouldn't have asked for it because it was, very insulting thing. Now, they could have asked for many other things. But the other thing they wanted to do is getting Crimea back, and, that was given. They had built, they were expanding everything and spending a lot of money, all because Barack Hussein Obama gave it away in one of the dumbest real estate deals I've ever seen.
I'm always torn how much of this to trim down because I don't want to provide something out of context and frame it like something that it isn't. But it's not just Trump. It's a lot of our politicians and senior leaders that just ramble, and they veer in so many different directions that I hate wasting your time to get to the valuable part. So I'm being cautious on that front. But a couple quick notes here. First off, the idea of Russia doesn't want NATO on their borders. NATO has been on their borders for a long time, right? Like prior to this conflict, they had Estonia and Latvia. Apparently that doesn't count or something. Ukraine does count. And then, of course, since the war began, the best NATO recruiter in the history of mankind, Vladimir Putin, we have Finland that has also joined NATO right on Russia's border. So, I don't know that. And here's the thing. That's we can look at the facts of that, but then we need to get into what Russia is actually saying. And for what it's worth, it's not lost on me that President Trump is kind of mocking former administrations for giving away territory in the hopes of peace, when that does seem like it's, at the very least, on the table in some regard right now. But turning to the Russian explanation of what this war is about right now, there's a lot of things they brought up in recent days. Just a few days ago, it was all about having international recognition of the territory that they have taken in the East. right? Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Lavrov switched it up a little bit, and he said the Russian Federation never aimed to seize Crimea or the Donbass. Its main task is to protect the Russian people. So the main task, it's not territorial control like it was last week, or for the most part of the last couple of years. It's not NATO. It's been a while since any Russian leaders are bringing up the expansion of NATO or talking about NATO on their borders, because I think at some point they were like, I guess people can look at maps and they can see that there are NATO countries on the border with Russia, and miraculously they haven't launched some crazy invasion of Russian territory, so maybe that one doesn't stick as much anymore. Either way, we've got Trump saying that it is Crimea and NATO as the root cause of this conflict, and Russia saying, no, now it's about protecting the Russian people in the East. And it wasn't just this. Lavrov's had a lot of statements in recent days. On Tuesday, he was asked to comment about the meeting in Washington, D.C. between President Trump and leaders of multiple European nations. And he said, quote, "What diplomatic steps did you see the European Union take? Before assessing such steps, we need to see them. So far, we've only witnessed aggressive efforts to raise tensions. We did not hear the Europeans put forward any constructive ideas." And this is one where I think it's best to move away from commentary and look at like the actual readouts of these things and the actual statements made by the heads of state, where it was, we want a ceasefire, we want peace, we want the war to stop. The takeaway from Russia in all of that is framing it as aggressive actions to raise tensions. Again, that's just not at all the result of that meeting on Monday. It's very hard to get to that point from what was had. Now, a little bit of skepticism on my part here, because we did see President Trump drop some statements about how this war was Ukraine's fault on Monday. I thought that was setting the stage poorly for the meeting, but hey, those meetings went well, and it seemed like everything was kind of moving in the right direction. One of my most optimistic videos in a long time came out Monday night. Something happened, and this is just the Trump up and down roller coaster. He was back on Fox News the very next day saying, you know what? Ukraine really shouldn't have taken on Russia like they did. Let's give that a listen.
Mr. President, did y'all discuss any land swaps yesterday? Because we've talked a lot about the Donbass region, and what was the feeling in the room? What did the other leaders say about this?
Well, they understand. Look, everybody can play cute and this and that, but, you know, Ukraine's going to get their life back. They're going to stop having people killed all over the place, and they're going to get a lot of land. But this was a war, and Russia is a powerful military nation, you know, whether people like it or not. It's a powerful nation. It's a much bigger nation. It's not a war that should have been started. You don't do that. You don't take on a nation that's 10 times your size. And
so I got it. Maybe it's minor details and people are glossing over that, but it continues to give an idea of where these negotiations are going to go when Trump over and again comes back to this idea that, you know, Ukraine shouldn't have done this. They should not have stood up to Russia. They should not have defended their territory. They should have just, ceded the land and laid down their arms. It's not great messaging in the middle of all of this. Now, in terms of positive news, we've actually got a fundraiser going on right now. You guys are killing it. We're at 65,000 out of 100,000 so far raised for the Azov International Battalion, and I know you're sick of me talking about it. It's over on Zynga's Paw, link in the description and pinned comment below. So how about a quick word from Knight over in Azov explaining exactly what this is going towards. Here we go.
Hey guys, Knight here from 3rd Battalion Azov International. We wanted to say thank you so much for your generous donations and messages of support. It means so much to us and will make a massive difference to all of us in the field. Thanks to Zynga's Paw, this fundraiser will be purchasing over 150 individual items, a list we spent weeks refining to ensure that every cent donated makes the biggest possible difference. This includes advanced NVGs, thermals, weapon attachments and optics, Starlinks, Mavics, power supplies, generators and batteries. It's a huge comprehensive list that will really help us in our fight. Thank you so much, Preston, and thank you so much to all you incredible guys at home who have donated. It's gonna help us so much.
All right, so again, thank you all so much for your incredible kindness and generosity. We've got 2 interviews published right now with a couple members of the Azov International Battalion diving into the tactics of that organization, and another one about what exactly was happening north of Pokrovsk and how they've dealt with those Russian infiltration-style tactics in recent months. So because of this fundraiser, we have access to these guys to be able to put these interviews together and hopefully share more information that you're not really able to get anywhere else. So again, if interested in Able, link in the pinned comment and description below. Shifting over to the Russian perspective of how things are going right now, there were a couple takeaways here from Mill bloggers that I thought were actually very insightful. Mill Info Live, or military informant on Telegram, said, quote, "On the one hand, as we expected, the negotiations ended with nothing in terms of practical, tangible results. No deal which Trump was so publicly pushing for was signed because the parties' positions are still far from compromise. There are absolutely no guarantees that the personal talks between the two Vladimirs, Putin and Zelensky, will move the parties' positions from a deadlock. Neither country is currently in a situation close to defeat or triumph, and accordingly, there are no incentives to make radical concessions on their stated demands." Again, this is a Russian Mill blogger, very pro-Russian. He wants Russia to win this war. He's looking at all of this saying there's no real reason, there's no incentive right now for Ukraine or Russia to cede off their maximum demands. He says it can be stated that both Zelensky and Putin still managed quite successfully to feed Trump their ideas about peace, which the American leader takes at face value and is a sincere desire to reach an agreement. Like Trump or not, I think that's pretty accurate. You know, Trump meets with Putin. He comes out saying some things that you would expect Russia and Putin to say. He meets with the European Union and Zelensky, and he comes out saying things you would expect to hear from them. Gets on the phone with Putin, and all of a sudden we've got more Ukraine never should have started this war in the first place type talk. So I think he's not the first one to say that, but I think that's pretty accurate. Now, another one here, Igor Girkin. So this is a former Russian military officer, very nationalistic. The guy's been locked up for traitorous activity in Russia, I think was the exact charge. He's on house arrest now, and every so often he puts out these letters. So you got to take this with a grain of salt that there's going to be some degree of censorship in what they're allowing him to publish. But I thought this was a pretty effective breakdown, and it's worth diving into. He says, quote, "It is not a question for me at all what will be concluded, because nothing will be concluded. The entire peace process is stillborn. It can be seen as simply a stalling tactic in which our leaders have become quite skilled. In this case, the stalling somewhat works in our favor, since no new sanctions against Russia are being introduced, and a fund is being created that makes it inconvenient for America to provide additional aid to Zelensky, although he already has more than enough. But how will all this mess end can be predicted with a very high degree of probability. It will not be possible to reconcile the positions between the so-called Ukraine and Russia in the end. There will be no exchange of territories." I'm going to pull up a map here as we talk through this. Deep state map. I'm back to the original version instead of satellite because I think it's easier for this context. There will be no exchange of territories simply because if it is done according to Witkoff, that is, exchanging the territories of Zaporizhia and Kherson for the Donbass, both Russia and Ukraine will be losers, and only the United States will win. Currently, neither Russia nor Ukraine is ready to admit defeat, so they will not agree to such a deal. So the first one here, he's saying one of the Witkoff deals, remember there were like at least 3 floating around at different points, was that Ukraine would cede the rest of the Donbass, a little portion in Luhansk, and the rest of Donetsk here in exchange for something Zaporozhye and Kherson, maybe a freezing of the lines. So right out the gate, he's saying that trade isn't going to work. Neither side's going to agree to that. He says if the exchange of territories is done according to Putin, that is exchanging small parts of Kharkiv and Sumy for the same territories in the Donbass controlled by Ukraine, Ukraine will naturally not agree, since the equivalence of these territories is practically zero. So that was another one when we've heard a lot of people, especially in the United States, talk recently about how Ukraine will get territory out of this. We looked up north and we said, I guess maybe they're talking about these little chunks occupied by Russia in Sumy and Kharkiv, and this bump over here would be ceded in exchange for all of the Donbass, the rest of the Donbass. And Girkin saying, yeah, no way. This right here is so much more important than those little pockets near Sumy and Kharkiv. He says, unfortunately, Kyiv holds densely populated areas while we hold small pieces of border territories with completely destroyed infrastructure, where we are fighting very hard battles, some more successful, some less, and some not successful at all. In any case, our successes are tactical without decisive significance. Therefore, there will be no agreements or results in the end. With high probability, Trump will say that Putin is not negotiable, or Zelensky is not negotiable, or both are not negotiable. America will wash its hands and leave it to the Europeans, who still remain its allies and will remain so to help Ukraine as they see fit. In general, I expect nothing from this, just a process for the sake of process, which will end in nothing, and all decisions will still be made on the front line. I hope that this ends up being a very pessimistic video. I'm nervous that a lot of the concessions that it seemed like we were maybe getting from Russia around meeting with Zelensky in the first place, around the possibility of some sort of Article 5 security agreement, a NATO-like security agreement, was too good to be true. And it seems like that's already starting to fall apart. I hope that's incorrect, and I hope there's something to be salvaged here. But again, even looking at the Russian sources, that all of these guys, they want Russia to win. They look at this and they say, yeah, Ukraine's not going to agree to it, and there's no reason Russia would agree to it, and it doesn't seem like there's any middle ground the two parties are going to get to anytime soon. Fingers crossed, we have more news here in the next day or two. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. That would be great, and we'll actually have some sort of meaningful meeting between Putin, Zelensky, and maybe even President Trump. But that's all we got for now. Again, if interested and able, fundraiser's ongoing in the description and pinned comment below. Help out the boys of the Azov International Battalion, thermals, comms, drones, and quite a bit more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.